Thank you all for being here today. Sorry we had a little stall, a few surprise technological glitches, but we're all fair and square now. I want to start with the land acknowledgement in this beautiful room, surrounded by the works of Norval Morisseau and poles from the Northwest Coast. The McMichael Canadian Art Collection is located on the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations territory, original lands of the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat people. It is uniquely situated along the Carrying Place Trail, which historically provided an integral connection for Indigenous people between Ontario's lakeshore and the Lake Simcoe Georgian Bay region. And that Carrying Place Trail runs along the East Humber right at the bottom of our bluff and was a major trading artery for over 5,000 years, and we're so lucky to be on such historically charged lands. The other thing is, as you leave today, if you go down the ramp, you'll see an installation at the bottom of the ramp which features ceremonial pipes. And those pipes, we obtained permission from the Wendat people, who are now located mostly in Quebec, north of Quebec City, close to the territory we'll be looking at today, to come and allow us to show those pipes. And they were excavated about 3 minutes drive from here, where Rutherford Road crosses the 400. There was a 500 years ago only, there was a village of some 3,000 people living there on this trading route. So this history is just beneath the surface here in Ontario, and we're glad to pay our respects to it. Today we're here to celebrate Quebec and also Impressionism, which is in its 150th birthday this year, since the first exhibition in Paris on the Boulevard des Capucines. And it took a while, as Anne-Marie Bouchard, our guest, will explain, for those, that artistic movement to come and seed itself in Quebec and also in English Canada, but the focus today is on Quebec. I want to start, before I introduce Anne-Marie, talking about the people who made this enormous project possible financially. Power Corporation of Canada was exceedingly generous in their support, as were Sally Hannon and Howard Barton, great friends to our institution. The publication was made possible by Rand and Linda Lomas. Rand is one of our most beloved board members here, and he saw the importance of this exhibition here. Canada Steamship Lines, Sheila and Paul Martin, Heffel Foundation, and Karen and Christopher McLeave also supported the show, as did Christine and Andrew Dunn, Alan Klinkoff Gallery, Greg Latremoille, Nathalie Mercure, and Michael Matheson, her husband, and Janet A. Scott, and the Friends of Quebec Impressionism, which was a group of like-minded Quebecois and lovers of Quebec based in and around Toronto, who joined Nathalie in her generous gesture towards this show. Of course, we can't do these kinds of audacious things without help from our friends, and this exhibition is of historical significance in this country. We were sort of surprised to learn as we got into the weeds of researching it and figuring out how to present it here. It is the first exhibition, large-scale exhibition, exclusively devoted to the work of the Quebec Impressionists ever to be mounted in English Canada. Now that is, if you've walked through the show on your way here and seen the quality of the work in the exhibition, you will share my stupefaction that could be the case in 2024, but nonetheless, such is the case. And so we're very thrilled to be able to highlight these artists here at the McMichael, home to the Art of Canada. We really are the place where it all comes together. Anne-Marie Bouchard, right here, is a curator based in Quebec City who specializes in Quebec art, but she knows about so many things, as we will discuss. At the Musée National des Beaux-Arts de Québec, she curated numerous exhibitions, among them A Private Passion, Modern Art in Quebec, from the Pierre Lassonde collection, and Mr. Lassonde has been a great lender to this exhibition as well, as you'll see if you read the labels carefully, as well as 350 years of art practice in Quebec. Her interests, though, go beyond simply art history. She is also, I've learned over the past few weeks that she is also a specialist in Baroque music, and once had a radio show for 2 years about Baroque music, and she is also currently delving into the emotional life of parrots and their relationship with humans. She is a parrot lover, she's a parrot mommy, and is currently doing her a PhD in psychology, exploring the relationship between humans and animals, and I think parrots will figure prominently in that discourse. She also holds a PhD in art history from the University of Montreal, teaches at Laval University Museum Studies, and is one of the most delightful colleagues I've had the pleasure of meeting during my time at the Helm at McMichael. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anne-Marie Bouchard. Have fun.
Just a second. Hi everyone, I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon. As you will probably see during this 1 hour presentation, sometimes my mind goes really fast, but my vocabulary in English doesn't get so fast. So maybe there are French words that will come out, but don't worry, I will find my way out of this quite quickly. So I hope you had the opportunity already to look at this wonderful exhibition. I am so proud to be co-curating it with Sarah Milroy. It has been a huge project that we started like in 2021 during the pandemic. Sarah and Jennifer came to Quebec City to meet me at the museum, and then we started to think about the fact that the museum was planning to build a new Riopelle pavilion, and that most of these collection of Impressionist Quebec was going to get into storage soon for a couple of years, because the new pavilion will be built over an existing pavilion, so we need to get the room to get closed because it's too dangerous for the artworks. And then Sarah had this really great idea to borrow all these paintings and make a huge exhibition of it at the McMichael. And I'm really proud of it because some of the paintings that you have the opportunity to see in this exhibition, and I'm thinking most of all about the Maurice Cullen Lance des Mers from 1904. I think it's the first time it gets out of the museum in Quebec. So since we have acquired it in 1949, if I'm right. So it's been a really nice journey working with the McMichael. So today I will present you some of these artworks. I'm not doing the same journey as you can find into the exhibition rooms. Instead, I will talk to you a bit more about the relations between the developing tourism at the time and the fact that the Quebec Impressionists were traveling on the territory, but that was not a rough territory, it was a touristic territory also, with lots of things to see in a big organization from the government of Quebec to make tourism discover all the province and all the magnificent region you will see into the exhibition. So first of all, I want to read to you a quote from the wonderful book, the wonderful catalog. A couple of years ago, I was working on, I'm still working on it, a book on women photographs that were in Quebec or that came to visit Quebec and to make photographs. And one of these women photographers was Edith Watson, who was an American woman who traveled to Canada and to Quebec, but she did all of the provinces of Canada. And she traveled extensively in Canada by boat, by rail, and she was really fond of Quebec, and she did pictures of almost all the regions you will see in this exhibition. Some of these pictures were sold as postcards after that. You can see some in the exhibition, but her most striking work, apart that the fact that she had numerous contracts with the Canadian magazine, and that most of her pictures were published in the Canadian magazine during those days. She also had the opportunity to write a book and to illustrate it with her photography, with her concubine, who was Victoria Award, a Bermudian writer, and they traveled both together all across all the provinces, and the book was released in 1922. And it was seen as one of the major, or maybe the first big touristic guide. And Victoria Award is also, we for like inventing the term mosaic to speak about the population of Canada as a big mosaic of people coming from different places. And they were really interested also in indigenous people, and they stayed over in some reserves also. So they were really interesting, two people really interesting, and they liked it so much. They wrote extensively on Quebec. So I will just read a small quote. Let me just find it, because it's easier to read in the book than on my PowerPoint. Okay. So I'm quoting Victoria Award from Romantic Canada. The inhabitants of rural Quebec cling as tenaciously to the life and atmosphere transplanted here from rural France more than 3 centuries ago, as the inhabitants of Quebec City cling to the atmosphere of ancestral French cities. Quebec is especially rich in its atmospheric landscape, a landscape so dear to the habitant art that outstanding features have become personalities. Thus, Montmorency Falls is called La Vache, the cow, a landscape too, where peaceful church spire is seldom out of sight of church spire, and all are within hail of some river. So this is a quote from the very interesting Victoria Award from 1922. The Impressionists in Quebec were working during a part of the history that was seeing an increased industrialization and urbanization. These developments were already in progress before the turn of the century, but accelerated rapidly during and after the First World War. It was in this context that the Quebec regionalist movement arose. Maybe you have heard that there was also a regionalist movement in France, and they are both really, really close together. They, spurred by the anxiety that many writers and artists felt at the disappearance of certain human types, traits, and even entire ways of life that they saw as essential to the authentic life of the land. We must tell that the regionalist movement, both in France and in Quebec, had really deep roots in the Catholic culture. And the fact that it was so popular in Quebec is that there was a really, I can say, a schism between the Anglophone community and the Francophone community at that time. And the government of Quebec wanted the people, the Francophone, to go up to the territory and to occupy this territory and be self-sufficient, because they saw a moral decadence into the life of the city. So that was it was really in full force during the 1920s and 30s. And some of it can be seen into the artworks you will see today. Most of the English artists, as Maurice Cullen, were not in that vibe, but some of them, like Clarence Gagnon, became really really important figures of this regionalist movement. Even though they never really talked about it themselves, they had a really nationalist view. It was the same for Marc-Aurèle de Foy Suzor-Coté. So here you have a card, a map, that presents useful information for tourists, such as roads, information relating to the natural resources that are found in different regions of Quebec. You can see it in red. It's so small. And it's more small on my computer. But there are some scriptures everywhere on the territory written you can find otters in some part, mixed agriculture on some parts, logging activities on other parts. So it had a it was published by the Ministry of Colonization in 1929. And this map was not only a tool for tourists to make them, help them in discovering the province, it was also used to encourage the population to invest in the territory at the precise moment when urbanization reached its peak. Indeed, the regionalist movement, just as I said, was nourished by Catholic cultures and wishes the population to occupy the territory, found large families, and promote self-sufficiency, which was associated with a kind of moral force. The ambivalence is present in several of the works of this exhibition between the love of territory and rurality and the interest of urban life and its dynamism. You can also see the red dots up on Quebec City. I will go now. I think I can do that with this. Yes. Here there's a red dot, also here, here, and on the south shore of Montreal, these are Indian reserves. Incidentally, encouraging tourism to travel to rural areas also encourages the occupation of some territory by the population. There were lots of large maritime and railway transport companies that used all means they had of publicizing the attraction of the different regions of Quebec. They published postcards, pamphlets, and even reports in magazines to increase their potential clientele while increasing the number of transport and accommodation throughout the country. It is fun to reflect on the development of tourism and that of Impressionism insofar as the first makes accessible territories far from city and offers sufficient comfort to allow extended stays in regions like Charlevoix and the Côte de Beaupré. Some of the image produced by the Impressionists sometimes give the impression of entering deeply remote region where the signs of modernity are not yet visible, but in fact the conceptual reality is more complex. So these are kinds of published postcards you could buy from the Canadian National Railway or the CP, who also were owners of some of the most famous hotels like the Château Richelieu, who is situated in French. So, and most of them were colored postcards, so really interesting one, and you can see the steamships also, so right there. And there were lots of these steamships that became afterwards the Canadian steamship lines. There were also lots of pictures. So this is one of the Richelieu and Ontario Navigation Company that became. So if you know a bit of Canadian Quebec art history, this image might remind you of something like Marc-Aurèle Fortin, the way the clouds are drawn, and the same for the trees. It was highly inspired by some of the Impressionists and post-Impressionists, and it's the kind of publicity that the government was publishing to make for the Provincial Bureau of Tourists, to make people have a kind of guide to go around different parts of the regions and of the Quebec province. And you can see we are deeply into this kind of ambivalence between modern roads, like with the car, and also those romantic views of horse carriage right there. So they used to play with the same kind of ambivalence we find into the Impressionist paintings, into the exhibition. The tour from Montreal to Quebec City, then to the Montmorency Falls and Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré, and on to Murray Bay. I'll take this one back. So you go from Montreal in the south. During the exhibition, we stop in the Laurentian region on the north and also at Mont-Saint-Hilaire right here. But people used to travel by boat, so they went from Montreal, then to Quebec City. They would stop en route to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré right here at the end of the Ile d'Orléans. And they'll then go on to Baie-Saint-Paul, and there are two roads in Charlevoix, one that is really near the St. Lawrence and is beautiful, and one we say in the backlands of Charlevoix, and then go on to La Malbaie to the Manoir Richelieu most of the time. So that was a route that was highly popular with the tourists during those years. Widely promoted by picture postcard, often hand-colored photographs, magazine, and many daily newspaper, tourists grew exponentially. Picturesque landscape wherever were never more than a stone throw away, and traditional village scenes reflecting the rough life of agricultural labor were easy to find, even though you were in a tourist area with all the comfort you needed. But urbanization had begun to make inroads, and the number of people living in urban area, mostly Montreal and Quebec City, grew rapidly for just 30% at the dawn of the 20th century to 60% three decades later. So ironically, it was precisely the modernization of the regional infrastructure, such as the railway, that allowed painters to make extended visit in searching for the oldest building, most unchanged village, and timeless landscapes. So I decided to use one of the expression Sarah Milroy used in her director foreword for the first part of this thematic journey through Quebec Impressionism today, vessels for time travel, because this is really how it was seen both by painters and by critics of the time, taking a plunge into all these beautiful paintings that shared some common view with the Impressionists in France, as just like some of them went to study in France and then they came back and they were searching for this, from the same scene that they could find in Brittany or in Normandy or in the outskirts of Paris, like there were more rural parts of France, and they tried to find the same thing in Quebec when they came in. So this is a painting by William Brymner that was made in 1885. And it shows those kids, but I mean, we see that it's in Quebec, but it could also be somewhere else in France if it was possible, because it's like a universal impressionist painting. Some of them were really into the Quebec land, but they are also, just like Ozias Leduc, who was living into the region of the Mont-Saint-Hilaire. But one thing that is really interesting with Ozias Leduc is that he was highly inspired by symbolism at that time. But when you look at this picture, you really get a sense that he was also inspired by some of the most important post-impressionists that were in full flight during the 1890s in France. And I'm talking about Camille Pissarro or maybe Maximilien Luce. There is a site. We feel that it's almost like pointillist. And this picture is exhibited in a room completely devoted to Ozias Leduc from the beginning of the 20th century. And it is exhibited with two other paintings. One is the Maison des Choquettes, and the other one is a view on agriculture at dawn, I think so. And most of the three paintings were made at the same time for the Choquette family, and it's the first time they are exhibited all together into an exhibition, so it's the first time that they come back together. Another William Brymner painting from the beginning of the 20th century. This one is in Ile d'Orléans. Ile d'Orléans has always been a kind of myth, I can say, in the Quebec society, but I think it goes beyond the Quebec society. It has always been seen as a kind of birthplace of the French-Canadian civilization. It's not really true, but it's fun to think that the French civilization in Canada had birth onto an island not far away from Quebec City. But it's not true, but it's still a place where you have really this rural feeling, and it's not remote, but you feel really, really far from the city when you go there, even today. So it hasn't changed a bit. And William Brymner was a huge fan of the Ile d'Orléans. He went there really often. He brought there also other painters like Clarence Gagnon, and they visited some artists that was staying there, and they used to travel around the Ile d'Orléans to find these kind of views. So this is a wonderful painting from the Quebec Museum that was restored a few years ago, and it was completely dark. We couldn't see. It was even difficult to see if there was a figure on that painting. So it reappeared when we decided to restore it. And it's a huge format, and you feel the clouds and the thunderstorm on the Laurentians behind, and it's really interesting. The representation of rural Quebec in regional artworks was still idealized at the turn of the 20th century, with habitants and red sleighs appearing in timeless country scene. There is no red sleigh, but you mean it's always a timeless country scene. Even photography could not escape this fashionable trend toward anachronism. An article in multiple regional publications showed farm laborers harvesting crops and women working at looms or baking bread, but scenes of rural land thought to be threatened in the near future by encroaching industrialization also appeared, like you can see. So this is one of the scenes that was made by Edith Watson. And I think that oxen plowing, I think that's how you say that in English, was maybe the most pictured scene of all rural life you can have. Clarence Gagnon did that. Maurice Cullen did that. Everybody did that. So when I was first, when the collector told me, I have a scene really interesting for you, you will see Edith Watson that did her own oxen plowing. I was like, wow, even in photography. And these photographies were made in Beaupré also, so they were really close to the Impressionists that were staying there at the time. I don't know if Edith Watson met with them, but I guess she must have, because I mean, Beaupré is not a really big place. So if there was a cultural community, artistic community, she must have been in contact with them. And she was also multiple times in contact with some of the wood sculptors that were staying there. One of the most famous is Louis Jobin. And he was a wood sculptor that was constructing different structures for a church in the region. So he was really famous, and everybody knows him, and she went a couple of times to photograph him into his studio in Beaupré also. Another oxen plowing. So when I'm talking about the timeless scenes of rural country, rural painting, this is it. I mean, this could be a scene from Fontainebleau, from Brittany, Normandy, and they were really looking into something that they already knew from somewhere else and trying to adapt in Quebec. And they found the same scene, so they were really happy about it, but they still had to work on the atmosphere, the clouds, and the temperature that was really different. So the wonderful painting from Maurice Cullen, Anse des Mers from 1904, that is in exhibition, and that's the one I was talking about before, saying that it must be the first time, or maybe not, but I'm pretty sure it's the first time it's exhibited in Ontario. And there is a winter version of this one you can see at the Art Gallery of Hamilton, and it's permanently on view near the staircase in the exhibition rooms. And they are both the same size, and it's really wonderful to see that. He went to do the winter one after this one, but this one is really huge. It's one of the biggest canvas, and when it was first exhibited, both the Canadian and the French critics were highly excited about that because it was such a new landscape for them, but still there were all the characteristics of Impressionism that they liked, and they really felt like we were going to do a Canadian Impressionist for the first time. That was in 1904 and 1905. You see a picture from the same years. Since then, it has completely changed. I mean, the Cap Diamant is still there, and it still has this kind of place that was completely broken right there, but all the shore have been, it's concrete now, and there's a road going there, so all these houses have disappeared. But it was still pretty rough landscape at the time, even though it was really, really near Quebec City. So it was part of Quebec City. It was really near the downtown Quebec. Just like in Toronto, in Quebec, you cannot escape winter. I've never been to Toronto during winter, but I guess it's pretty harsh. Quebec is pretty cool with winter. So the Quebec Impressionists did not invent the Canadian winter landscape. Its pastoral and rustic convention had been present in the works of their predecessor for more than a century. There are lots of pictures of this into the catalog. You can see pictures of Northern Lights that were made in the early 19th century by a painter in Quebec. But each generation blended realism and fantasy in its own way, from the topographic painters to Cornelius Krigoff, that you might know, later in the 19th century. L'escape as a genre expanded with Impressionism, allowing painters to approach their art with deepening subjectivity, invoking their unique perception of light and color as license to liberate their brushwork from the heavy end of academic training. So Impressionism practiced in France was from the beginning the art of the fleeting sensation, whose aim was to translate the artist's immediate visual impressions in a way that gave the viewer a really vivid experience. So the Canadian winter offered a new field for experimentation, and the northern experience that distinguishes Canadian landscape from one painted in France. You know, it snows in France, but like 1 centimeter. And it's complete chaos on the road. And they do news on this. It's really funny. The quality of light as freezing temperatures, the crystalline atmosphere, the whiteness of the snow, and the endless expanse and distant horizon, but also the severe cold and the hardship of life on the land were all constant source of inspiration for Canadian painters and mostly Quebec ones. So here again, I mean, when you look at visual culture at the same time, you are completely unable to escape winter. It's everywhere in the pictures. From the first really important photographers, and I'm thinking about Alexander Anderson, that was in Montreal and that was making photographs of the Victoria Bridge that was being constructed at the time, or those scenes of the market in Quebec cities that were sold massively to different kinds of people in the population, both tourists and people that were living in the city. So there were always these two pictures together that you had to put you put the picture into a kind of glass and then you can see it in 3 dimensions. It's really interesting. The stereogram we say in French. So these were really, really, really popular, and this one was made by Keystone View Company, which was a huge company that was producing these kinds of pictures. So winter was everywhere. I mean, it's really fun to look at that man here. And this is maybe his son that is like, okay, Dad, I'm gonna go up there. It's so much fun. So this is from Louis Prudent Vallée, who was a really famous photographer from Quebec City, who had his own studio and who was selling pictures. And he had a really interesting career because he was both a person who did some kind of a more, I could say, mass pictures, mass photograph, and also more artistic ones. So it's really interesting, and these two orientations can be seen in each and every one of his pictures because he was so talented. Another one from here. You know what? It's still exactly the same, apart from the tramway, which is an ongoing question in Quebec City. But I want the tramway to come back, but it still looks exactly the same. And this is the place where we still have horse carriage to do touristic tours around the city. So it hasn't changed a lot. And this is a picture from Ozias Leduc himself. Most of the Impressionist painters were also working with cameras at that time. It helped them in different ways because, I mean, it's so fun to paint in the snow. Maybe a small wood canvas, but not the big canvas. You don't do that. Everything will freeze. So both Clarence Gagnon and Ozias Leduc and many more used to work with photographs. They would take of a place they wanted to paint and then go back to the studio and work on their big canvases in the studio because, I mean, it is so long for the painting to dry. You cannot do that in a day. It takes several days to put all you want on the canvas, so it's much more complicated than it looks like. But you will see what is more interesting is that it took these pictures from the Choquette family residence in 1899, and then he went on to studio to make this picture. But if you are like really a person that has a great sense of observation, you will see that he just kind of displays the trees, and he just decided to take out the electric pole also. Like, it's not rural enough. So it was replaced by fir. I think that's it, a sapin. But the picture is so, this one is so much more interesting than the picture because you see at the back, you can mostly not see the forest. It's like it's faded. But then when you go and see this canvas, you can see all and each tree has been treated independently. It's really wonderful. And he went on to add some birds right there. So, you know, I love birds. So if there are birds, I'm really excited. But it makes us feel, I mean, we really feel like it's a kind of personal view on their home, and it was made for them. So it was really a romantic view, also a really emotional one. So it's a nice, one of the first pictures I remember seeing at the museum in Quebec when I was really a young girl. And I was always amazed at its photographic qualities, but it took really a long time before I was aware there was also a photography made for this picture. Maurice Cullen and the Port of Montreal. If you like Impressionists in France, you know that most of the artists that were working, I'm thinking about Monet or even Degas, they really liked to paint the smokes into the train stations, and that was really a subject in itself because it kind of represented modernity and something that was an atmospheric features of the train station that they really liked, and they did it a lot. So it's no surprise that when Maurice Cullen and also Marc-Aurèle de Foy Suzor-Coté came back from France, decided to kind of try to give the same impression, but working on the Port of Montreal was a nice way to do it because there was so much activity. There were all these fumes, all these smokes. There were the ice on the St. Lawrence also you can see, and both of these are huge canvases. They are really interesting, and it's fun to see that the Montreal landscape has changed a lot, but you can still identify almost all of the buildings that you can see into this one. They are still there, and there are still some kind of these fumes also. So you really sense their interest in Impressionists in these kinds of painting because they are all working on atmosphere and that in subject. It's not really the city, it's more the clouds and everything that's going on right there. And you feel the season. You know, I'm sure it's like this in Toronto in winter too. Like, it's gray, just gray and a bit of orange. Another snowstorm made by Maurice Cullen. He really liked painting snowstorm. He did a lot of these. This one is a smaller one. There's a sketchy aspect to it that is really interesting. And you can see, if you take a look at all of the painting in the exhibition, you will see he really likes to get this kind of view, an oblique view of horses, carriage coming from the back of the picture to the front with all this snow and this really dense atmosphere. So it's a repetitive view in his artworks, but it's really interesting, just like he did it in a series. One of the most striking of the whole exhibition is this one by Henrietta Mabel May, a street scene from Montreal, which is a very cherished artist to me, a woman artist from the Beaver Hall group, and who did the very different kinds of painting, port scenes, street scenes, that are really different from the other women painters that were also with her in the Beaver Hall group. But this one is really interesting, but because there is so much going on. The horse at the first, you see just in front, at the front of the picture, and what's going on at the back with the city, and also the clouds and the smoke. So many things to look at, and so many really detailed aspects. It's at the same time impressionist at the back and really realist at the front. So really interesting one. You will also see that Robert Pilot made so many different pictures of this sort of scene, the people and horse carriage meeting at the ferry. So we are in Lévis in front of Quebec, and you can see on the other side the Cap Diamant and the Citadelle right there at the top, and all those small lights near the road at the bottom of the Cap Diamant. So all these people were traveling to Quebec City at that time. And this is a view he did, I don't know, maybe 30 times. He did so much. He really appreciated, I think, the kind of dynamism that was outgoing, the movement and everybody standing there, and then also the clouds and the general atmosphere with the snow on the Cap Diamant at the back. This one is a delightful painting from Ozias Leduc, a really, really small one with the moon right there. And I mean, this is almost an abstract painting from 1910. And Ozias Leduc went on to be the master of Paul-Émile Bordua, who was really an important figures in Quebec painting, abstract painting during the 1940s. He was really interested in all spiritual matters. He was a really spiritual man himself. And he was also somebody who made a lot of decoration for church around the Mont-Saint-Hilaire, but also in some other regions. I think there is one in Shawinigan, so near Trois-Rivières. So he was a really interesting figure. This is highly symbolist, but still the treatment of the painting looks a bit like some Impressionist, because he's working also on the lights and the atmosphere. This wonderful painting, April Afternoon, was one of the 4 paintings that were first bought by the Quebec government to make the national collection in 1920, so the same year it was done. And the government of Quebec started to collect buy different paintings to make this national collection. And the museum in Quebec only opened in 1933, so it took like 13 years after that it kind of became a masterpiece of the collection. And some sarcastic people like to say that the Quebec Museum was built for Marc-Aurèle de Foy Suzor-Coté because he was such a huge and interesting personality, and he was highly famous, and everybody knew him, and he was really selling his art as a nationalist art. So it was seen as this, and it couldn't be anywhere else than in the National Collection of Quebec. So we have so many pieces by him: drawing, pastels, painting, sculptures also. You have one in the exhibition. So he was a really interesting figure, and I mean, he's just, you cannot think of Quebec art without thinking about Suzor-Coté, whose real name was Marc-Aurèle Coté at first, but then he went to France and he added some particule to it to make it look like fancy. And Coté normally has an accent on the O, but he decided to take it off because Coté like this means like it has high value in French. So you say something is coté, like something is really valuable. So, you can size the personality. So he went to France, Marc-Aurèle Coté, and then came back with all this new name. This is a really interesting one because we don't see often in all the composition of Clarence Gagnon, the train coming in the front like this with all the smoke, the black smoke. And it really emphasized the idea of we are losing something for the benefit of modernity and modern transport. And so you can see the Valley of Baie-Saint-Paul at the back, which is completely pure with all its snow and the mountains and everything. And then this train is so violently coming in front of the picture. So it's a really interesting picture because of this, and we don't find it often in his work. It's really, really a rare view. And I think it is a kind of editorial view, but I'm not sure. I mean, I didn't talk about it with him. I didn't have the opportunity, unfortunately. But I wanted to show you this one because Jean-Paul Lemieux, as you might know, was also somebody who was highly engaged with the Charlevoix region. He went there at the beginning of the 20th century. He was there during the 40s. He lived there at the end of his life at Île-aux-Coudres. He was like a lover of Charlevoix region, and he also did this one with the train coming in front. Le Rapide means a train. And there is also one with the highway, so it's so minimalist, but you have the same feeling as white pure snow. That is just like you cannot see the end of it, and that train coming, which represents modernity. But this one was made like 50 years later. I didn't show you this to make you think that Quebec's art did not evolve, but it's fun to think that these kinds of view on the landscape stayed for a long time, and you can still find these kinds of scenes, and you can see it by yourself. So right now in 2024. The last thematic I wanted to talk a bit about was humanscapes, because when we think of Impressionism, mostly we think about landscapes. But there are so many nice portraits that were made by these artists that were really talented also in portraiture, and they wanted to show different views on human. And one of the things that is really interesting with Impressionists is that it has a kind of sociological value as well, because It was kind of the first art movement that decided to take a footstep back from this idea of antiquity as the ideal, and that decided that painting reality was the most interesting painters could do. So they had this view on life that was really like down to earth, deep rooted into reality, and they did also so many nice portraits of people they had to meet or they wanted to portrait. So this is the three-figure sculpture from Marc-Aurèle de Foy Suzor-Coté, the woman of Caughnawaga, which is now Kanawake, in the south of Montreal. And you can see there's a nice picture in the book, a photograph made at the same time, and we can see that the people are dressed almost the same. You have here two pictures also made by Suzor-Coté, the painting on NGC. It is not in the exhibition because it's there in their permanent collection, so it was not possible to lend it. And the other one is a pastel from the collection in Quebec City that I had I was absolutely happy to get to acquire this pastel a few years ago, which was made before the painting. And it's supposed to be a young woman from the Wolinac Reserve near Trois-Rivières who went to the studio at Marc-Aurèle Fortin and seated there to be his model. If you look at it, you see that she's holding an apple, which is not a really feminist sign put in there. It's like Eve eating the apple. So there's a kind of sexual weirdness into these paintings. These are not really indigenous. I mean, this is a really white man looking at a young indigenous women, but they are still really interesting because he didn't do that really often, and it was they are quite standing out into all of the drawings he had to make it during his life. They are different from all the other portraits he did also, but you can see there are other drawings also from people from the reserve in Kanawake, and he used to ask them to come to his studio in Montreal at that time. So this one, I won't talk about it really long because there is an incredible essay by Samantha Burton into the catalog, so I encourage you to buy the catalog and read this essay. She argued that, she tells us that they were like knitting socks for the people that were on war, the boys that were on the war. So it has a really engaged and political meaning that is really interesting, but it's also a kind of sweet scene on the St. Lawrence, seeing all these women focused on their work, working as independent minds, and doing their effort for the war also at that time. And this one is, I encourage you to look at the faces. They have like green marks on it, and it's really impressionist. And Henrietta Mabel May did, I mean, this can look like also like a Hélène McNichol painting, if you know her. She was really highly talented, and she was able to treat painting in such different ways. It's astonishing what she could achieve. I really like photographs from the beginning of the 20th century because it's the beginning of leisure photography. So yeah, now you can see the Montreal photograph, Harry Sutcliffe and his family at Montmorency Falls, so at the beginning of the century. And all of these kind of workscapes, leisurescapes, but that are also like socialscapes, where Impressionist painters decided to work on people making what they had to do. So people living on the street, people working on the street. This is really different from all these empty landscapes that you can see in different regions. So this is the marketplace in Jacques Cartier Place in Montreal. Woman making shells from Henrietta Mabel May, which is not in the exhibition, I think, but is in the catalog. It's a really striking one too. A leisure escape from yacht racing near Montreal also. And it looks like some of the most important works by James Wilson Morrice he has done in Brittany with the yacht racing also. So they highly influence each other. And I want to one of the things that they were aware of, all the artists intellectual, they wanted to kind of picture some of the work, the way of working on things that were disappearing, because at that time there were like highly big manufacturers that were getting built into the United States and also in Quebec, doing all the works that the weaving the women did. So they kind of decided to paint these things also to make sure we get we keep a picture, we keep an image on what was it living at that time before the industrialization. So one of the first painting William Brymner did, I think, on the Ile d'Orléans in Quebec. And that's how it's finished. It's the end. back in home. I cannot see anyone, but if you have questions, I will take it. Yes. This is from Ozias Leduc. You will see it in the room that is all Ozias Leduc. You also have in this room some wonderful stoneware and earthware in the middle of the pièce. So there is only Ozias Leduc right there. And this is one of the smallest one. Highly spiritual Ozias Leduc.
I don't know if we are.
Yes?
Table set up.
How were these paintings received by the public when they were first?
I mean, landscape in Quebec has always been a way of like negotiating for the artist the liberty of painting with highly valuable genre of painting. I mean, everybody liked landscape. Even the collectors that were the most conservative would like landscape. The landscape were in their collection already, even though it was landscape from the Dutch people and old ones. So landscape was seen as a way of freeing your pictures because it was still highly popular, but then you can treat them with real modernity. So it was mostly, they were really well accepted, and the critics were pretty in favor of paintings, even from the women that I don't know why it kind of disappeared during the 50s, but during the 20s and 30s, they had great coverage in all the newspaper you could find in Montreal, and the critics were really, really interested in them. And most of them, that's why also the government of Quebec decided to buy them the same year that they were painted. So they were like really aware at the interest these paintings were for the government and for the heritage of the province of Quebec. I hope it answers your questions. Yes?
So is the catalog representing everything that's on show here in the gallery?
Yeah. And even more.
Do you want to talk a little bit, Anne-Marie, about the Indigenous works that are on the table in the Leaving Montreal room?
Yes, I didn't because
And Canawaga, butcher in relation to those.
There's a nice essay by Carla Hemlock in the book on all these I don't know them that much, so I'm a bit like it's tricky for me to talk about them. But you will see in the Leaving Montreal section, there are all these beads pieces that were made by the Mohawk community, most of them. And people at that time from the Indigenous community would come to the cities, both in Montreal, so the Mohawk community came to Montreal to sell these beaded items. And it was the same in Quebec City. And I think it was even more complex in Quebec City, where we have the Wendat community just up north of the city. And most of the women of the Wendat community were going to school at the Ursuline, who were highly specialized in all artistic, like lace and everything. They were doing all sorts of artistry. And so they kind of exchanged their way of weaving and treating the beads and everything, so it became really interesting. And they were selling out these items both to tourists and to people who were really collecting them because they were so interested. I should have put them in there, but I mean, the women from Wendake were selling their items through like Old Renfrew and Burke's and all these big places in center town of Quebec. And they were really seen as like unique pieces, highly valuable pieces, and they have so many things at the Musée de la Civilisation in Quebec. It's incredible. Most of them have never been exhibited. So there is another exhibition to do.
Oh, yeah. Let's get on it.
You need more space.
Yeah, exactly.
So if there are no more questions, thank you very much for being here.
I have one more question. You haven't talked a lot today about James Wilson Morrice.
No, I know.
Or Morris. First of all, can you explain about his name? And can you tell us about his example and his importance to these artists that you've shown us today?
Yeah, Maurice was one of the first to go to France and to live there in Paris and to be really inspired by the Impressionists. And then he came back to Montreal a couple of times, and he got to be really friends with Maurice Cullen, and they decided, both of them, to travel to the Côte de Beaupré. And they came back really often, both in winter and in summer, to paint on the Côte de Beaupré. There were so many of them, Clarence Gagnon was also with them, that they became seen like as a group of Beaupré. That was how they were called. They were not only painters there, they were also literary figures of Montreal, intellectual figures. And they were staying in Beaupré like for 2 months or something like this. And Maurice, as I say in French, because he lived in France for so many years, was really interested in the atmosphere in Quebec, which was really different from the one in France. And he was seen as a kind of precursor by all of the other artists that were younger than him, because he had such a huge success in France, and he was like acquainted with artists like Henri Matisse later in his life. So he was seen as a really great figure of success, and that it could be possible to paint Quebec and have success in France also. And then at the end of his life, he also went to the Caribbean to paint a lot also. So he's really an interesting figure. He was born in Toronto, and he moved really soon in his life to Montreal. I think his father was in the
Textiles.
In the CP?
No, textiles.
Oh, textile. But it's a bit the same story as Hélène McNicol, whose father was in the CP, and she went from Toronto to Montreal. And then he lived in Montreal for a couple of years. His father was not really, did not agree on his artistic career, but some of his friends were like, had a more artistic view, and then they were like, you should let him because he's really, really talented. And then he lived in Paris during the 80s, 90s. I did my doctoral thesis on France at that time, and they were the anarchist time, and he was quite near to the anarchist movement. You can read that in all of his small books he did with sketches and everything. So I don't know, did I talk about that?
Yeah.
There are resemblance, really interesting ones, between the light you can see in his Montreal snow scene and the scene that he made in Venice. So you should, while you get around, you should look at it, Venice in Google, Venice and Morrice. It's really weird how he did manage to find some lights that were common to both of these cities, because I just cannot find it myself.
Well, thank you so much, Anne-Marie.
You're welcome.
It's just fantastic. Anne-Marie and I will be signing briefly right after this talk down by the bookshop, so please come and join us. And please enjoy the show. As we mentioned earlier, the core of the exhibition came from the Musée National des Beaux-Arts de Québec because of their renovation. This checklist would have been impossible under any other circumstances. And then we were lucky enough to have the National Gallery of Canada come in with an additional 17 infrequently loaned works as well. Plus, we plundered the private collections of many wonderful and generous people to make this exhibition. So it will not happen again. It is here with us until January. Please bring your friends. We will also be opening very soon, I think next weekend it is, the exhibition of Caroline Monet, who is the Algonquin French artist who will be showing her sculpture and textile works in the gallery right after Quebec Impressionism, and she is from the territory of the St. Lawrence, and many of the works in the show deal with the river that walks, which is the Algonquin name for the St. Lawrence River, signaling its role in transport and connecting people as we are all connected today. So thank you so much for being with us. Perhaps we will meet down by the bookshop. And again, Anne-Marie, that was utterly delightful. Thank you so much. Have a great day.